I am going to give David a short interview. We're absolutely honoured to have him. I kind of sent an email to him and he very kindly accepted. So we have David, the urban birder, broadcaster, writer, speaker, tour leader, educator, and his mission is to engage city folk around the world with the environment through the medium of birds. I shan't say any more because you're here to see and hear David. So over to you, David. Thank you very much. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. And what a pleasure it is to be here tonight. It's really nice to actually give a talk sitting down as well. You know, it's been a while since I sat down and gave a talk. And also, for those wondering, the bird on my shoulder, can anyone recognize it? I doubt if you can actually, to be honest. It is a skua, but it's actually a Chilean skua. And I took that picture in Chile, believe it or not. So I thought it'd be a nice kind of background, because otherwise my background's a bit of a dull wall, which wouldn't really work anyway. But anyway, thank you very much for coming tonight. I'd like to chat to you about urban birding. And to be honest, I want to talk to you about some of the places I've been to recently. We all can't travel at the moment, or we're beginning to travel now, but obviously things have changed a lot since this pandemic. And for those who don't know, I'm actually speaking to you from Spain. I'm in Extremadura, and I will be here. And in fact, I've been here since February, and it's been pretty tough actually, because the lockdown here was draconian compared to the lockdown light that you guys had in England. No exercise for about 60 days, and then when we did actually manage to get out, you know, it was like really weird because I felt agoraphobic and all sorts of things. And when I went outside, I felt very kind of insecure and exposed and stuff. It's amazing what happens to you when you are in your house for all that time. And obviously I was popping down to the shop every now and again, but that was literally 5 minutes. So it wasn't a major excursion. So yeah, it's been a very weird time. But since then, or during that period, I've been doing a lot of work, and one of the things I've been doing is plenty of Zooms. So I'm kind of used to how this works. And I've been doing my own Zooms, by the way. I got this thing called In Conservation With, where I talk to different people within the world of natural history, writers, artists, conservationists, all sorts of people. And I talk to them for an hour. So you should come along one time. It's on my website, theurbanbirderworld.com. Anyway, let's start with no further ado. Let's look at the presentation tonight. So it's the Urban Birder Travels. I'm a Londoner. This is London. In fact, that is Notting Hill. And it's quite interesting when you lie on the pavement on your back, the amount of people that just walk past without looking at you. This was probably the only picture I've got that people actually looked at me, because most people, you could be lying naked on the floor and people just walk straight past you because they pretend not to see you. It's really strange. Anyway, I have been interested in nature, wildlife, all that sort of stuff since I was a small child. In fact, I think that I was interested in nature before I was born. I often say that as in my previous life, I was a cougar. And as a cougar, I used to eat birds. And one day I went to attack a bird and it flew off, and I watched it. I thought, that's amazing. That looks absolutely stunning. So I became a birding cougar. And whilst doing that, I obviously came to my demise because I wasn't eating. But I was thinking before I passed on that I touched on something quite interesting here that I'd like to explore. And if there is a next life, maybe I can do it. And fortunately, I was born in northwest London as a human, and that was that. So I started my interest in birds as a young child, maybe 5 years old. No one around me had any interest whatsoever. So it was actually myself teaching myself about birds and other wildlife. In fact, my interest started with insects. And my mum was kind of a bit confused why her kid was interested in birds and where did that come from. And it was also a bit weird because being a black kid in Wembley and all those sort of areas where it's predominantly black and Irish, no one around me understood why I had that interest at all. But I developed it. At the age of 7, I walked into a library and I managed to get a book I don't know if you can see it with my background. I can't even see myself here actually, but you might see it. Birds of Britain, Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. Some of you may actually recognize this book. But I found this book and I couldn't believe it. It was like finding the Holy Scriptures. I mean, over 1,000 birds illustrated, all in color. And this is like amazing. So I read this book inside out, back to front, sideways, upside down. And by the age of 8, I was a veritable walking encyclopedia on the birds of Britain, Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. And I actually knew a bit about some of the birds of the world as well. So that was how kind of committed I was to it. I grew up a little bit. This is me when I was probably about 13, and my sister there. And as you can see, I was sporting binoculars then. And also I was adhering to the rule that I still stand by to this day, which is you don't have to wear green. You can look a bit cool. You can wear cut-down T-shirts and flares. You can even grow an afro if you want. It's all about relaxing and enjoying yourself. And I was actually urban birding. I was in this place. I was actually on a ship, on a ferry, and this was on the River Hudson in New York. So I was actually birding in New York at that age. But as a kid, I was told all the time that you can only see wildlife in the countryside, and I had no one to take me there. So in the end, I suddenly just turned around and realized that there was nature all around me. And that's, I suppose, when I was born as an urban birder, even though I didn't actually realize it until years later. So let's go straight into this, because obviously, as I say, I'm in London, or I'm in London, should I say, but I'm not in London. And I've been the urban birder professionally for the last, 16 years. I decided to cross over and become professional when I had a lucky break with the BBC to actually go on to Springwash to talk about my local patch, Wormwood Scrubs in West London, that some of you may actually know. And I'm actually going to talk about that later as well. So where am I now? Well, I am in España. I'm in a region called Extremadura, and it's kind of around this area here, and I'm about here. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around, but it's near Badajoz, so I'm quite close to the Portuguese border. And just to get in a bit closer, there's Badajoz again, and to the right is Mérida, and that's the city I'm actually in at the moment. I was actually, before the lockdown, if I just go back for a sec, I was on a press trip in Salamanca. And I got wind of the fact that there was going to be some kind of lockdown, and I was advised to kind of scalp as soon as possible. And I've been renting a flat in Mérida for a couple of years now as a sort of a bolt hole. So I thought I'll just pop down there. This whole pandemic will last a couple of weeks and it'll be fine. But obviously, months later, I'm still here. So yeah, Mérida. So Extremadura is a region which is twice the size of Wales. It's split into 2 provinces. You've got the southern province, which basically cuts across above Mérida and Badajoz, and that's called Cáceres. That's the Cáceres province. And the remaining part of the province, which is the southern half, is called the Badajoz province. And a lot of people know Spain, or know this place quite well, because it's a very famous place for birding. We're going to talk about it in a second. But I want to kind of concentrate more on the urban side, especially around in Mérida. But as I say, it's twice the size of Wales. There's only 1 million people here. It's a really sparsely populated place. In fact, it's less than 1 million people. But the scenery is absolutely stunning. This is one of the places that people often come to Extremadura for when they come birding. It's in Monfragüe, Parque Nacional, or Natural even, Monfragüe, and that particular feature, that rock feature, is called Peña Falcón even, so I always think about falcon, Peña Falcón, and it's a feature which is normally crowded with vultures. So when you show up, when you stand on the road looking across the river Tieto onto that rock, you can normally see a load of Griffin vultures actually sort of nesting and sitting around there. But it's a brilliant place for raptors, because I think as many as 20 odd species can be seen there. I mean, I was there 2 weeks ago doing a live Facebook feed, and we actually had peregrine, Griffin Vulture, black vulture, booted eagle, black kite. I mean, kestrel, lesser kestrel. We had loads of stuff there. I'll talk about some of the birds you get in Extremadura shortly, but the landscape in Extremadura is quite interesting because people think of it as being very barren, and they think the name Extremadura means, you have to be, it's very barren and not durable. You have to be durable to be there and stuff like that. Well, it does get very hot there. That is true. But it is also a mixture of habitats ranging from, in the north, more kind of mountainous, through to kind of man-made sierras, like miles upon miles of sierra, which grassland, which houses or is home to bustards like greats and little bustards, as well as sand grouse. Lots of old buildings, interesting places which are hardly visited. I mean, I go to some castles sometimes and there's no one there, absolutely no one there. This is one of my favourite spots for birding, actually, and it's in my province. It's called Santa Amalia, and if it was in England, it would be a massive nature reserve. It's a rice field, well, series of rice fields, but it's absolutely humongous. I mean, you can spend at least half a day. And what's interesting about going birding in Extremadura is that you can do a lot of it, in fact, most of it by car, and you can actually almost do a safari and drive along these fields and stop. And this area is not even a nature reserve. It's actually working rice fields, and it's a happy accident that they have left them the way they have, so that during the autumn, when they've done the harvesting, they leave the fields wet with stubble, and it's an absolute mecca for waders, and during the winter, thousands of cranes. And there's many of these kind of rice fields in the whole region. So, it's not just one place. So it's really nice, to visit them during the course of a day, visit a couple of them and then search for whatever birds you can find. And as I said, there's also mountainous regions as well, towards the north. I think the tallest mountain is about 6,000 feet in the, I can't remember where it is now. I can't recall. I've totally gone blank. But basically, there's some beautiful mountains. I was actually in some 2 weeks ago, and we're watching birds like ortolan bunting and rufous-tailed rock thrush, blue rock thrush, rock bunting. And during the winter, in one of these ranges, we found wall creeper, which was really fascinating to see, because it's a bird that in Spain you'd have to normally be near. Where do you need to be near? You need to be near Pamplona, up that way, Navarra, which is in northern Spain, to even have a chance of seeing those kind of birds. And during the summer too, it's, in fact, at the moment, this is what the landscape looks like. What's interesting about the region is that the rain season, if one for that phrase, it actually kind of starts in November until around about April. And by rainy season, actually it's a wrong phrase, it just rains a bit more than it normally does. And sometimes you wake up and it's a bit grey, but it's never as grey as it is in England. It's a light grey. And even then, the light grey dissipates and blue comes and grey comes back again. It's not heavy sort of grey clouds like it is in England. And then from around about April, May, all the way through until October, it's mostly sunshine. At the moment, it's 36 degrees. I'm sitting in my office in my apartment, got all my windows and shutters open and the shutters down, should I say, windows open, because it's bloody hot outside. And that's what it looks like outside. And then in October, it starts to rain a bit more. And when it rains, it suddenly just goes green again, because the spring in Extremadura, which is around about March, April time, the whole place is filled with these lovely meadows with flowers, and there's also amazing orchids here as well. And then it suddenly becomes blonde, which I love as well. I think it's a really interesting landscape. And then come October, it looks a bit like this. And this also is what the spring looks like. And this is actually on the outskirts of the city that I'm in, Merida. I'll tell you a bit more about Merida in a second. I just want to kind of run through some of the species that you might see whilst out in the wilds and also in Merida. But standing on this particular field, there's a river behind me, a little creek behind me, And I remember standing here in the spring, and I heard about 5 or 6 quail singing in that grass. There's Zitin cisticulars, or fan-tailed warblers, as I like to call them from the old days. Chetty's warblers everywhere, nightingales everywhere, serins everywhere, greenfinch, linnets, goldfinches everywhere, blackbirds as well. Whilst I was standing here, I had a Montague's harrier fly over. They've become particularly rare here now, unfortunately, because, well, actually, we're not quite sure. I think it's changes in the land use for a start, because the farmers are now actually harvesting a lot earlier. So they are killing, obviously harvesting the chicks in the nest as well. So people are trying to protect them, but the numbers have dropped phenomenally. But anyway, lesser kestrel, glossy ibis. It's just incredible. I mean, this is just on the edge of the city. It's just incredible. In the winter, blue throat behind me in the reeds. It's great. One of the main raptors you'll see during the summer, and also sometimes in the winter, because they stay a little bit during the winter, are booted eagles. This is a booted eagle. They are a little bit bigger than a buzzard, but they are more of an eagle in terms of their shape, if you get my meaning, more square-winged. And they're much more voracious and vicious than a buzzard would ever be. I've seen them stoop over the city after pigeons. They're really quite aggressive. Beautiful birds. They come in 2 colour phases. One is the pale phase, which is what you're seeing now. So when you see it flying overhead, it almost looks like an osprey or a stork even, because the white on the inner wings quite bright and the black flight feathers show up really well. What's really interesting about being in Extremadura is because it's so bright and sunny, the light reflects off the ground. So when you're looking at the birds flying overhead, you can really see their colours beautifully. It's absolutely amazing what you can see. Also, a common bird, really, is the Griffin Vulture. There are just under 4,000 pairs of Griffin Vulture in the whole of the region. So you can see them practically everywhere. I mean, I stand in my city, in Merida. I have a sunroof here. And during lockdown, I'd look up and I'd see them the whole time. There's a really massive population of them. And when you see them flying overhead, you can really see the intricate markings as well, because the light rebounds back off the ground off to them. You can actually see them very clearly. They're beautiful birds, massive, absolutely huge. The other raptor, the other vulture to be seen is the black vulture, which is Europe's largest raptor. They are humongous, 9-foot wingspan. They make a golden eagle look puny in many ways. There's around about 900 pairs in Extremadura, and they have a discontinuous distribution from Iberia all the way over to Mongolia, but the population in Extremadura is the biggest in the world. So again, with this species, you can also see them flying overhead quite commonly, even over Merida, where I am now. Normally in 1s or 2s compared to 10s and 20s of Griffin vultures, but you'll still see them. And one of the best ways of telling them apart when you see them flying overhead is if you can see the feet of a vulture, if you can see the pale feet, then it's a black vulture. And the reason for that is that the undertail coverts, the feathers where it rests its feet when it's flying are dark. So they show the feet colour up straight away. Whereas the griffin, I may even go back and show you if I can find my cursor. The griffin vulture, the griffin vulture, because it's because it's all dark, you can't really see the feet at all. So that's the difference. Their feet are dark as well. Okay, so Merida is an interesting place. Basically, it is a very old city. It used to be the capital of the Romans outside of Rome. So as a consequence, there's lots of Roman ruins. In fact, it has more Roman ruins than any other city in the whole of Spain. And on this particular picture, or in this picture, we're standing on the Roman bridge, imaginatively titled, but it's an amazing bridge. It's the longest and oldest Roman bridge in the world. It's, I think, just under 2 kilometers long. And we go birding here because it's one of the best birding spots in the whole of Extremadura, believe it or not, because when you stand on one end of it, and this is myself with my, I lead tours to Extremadura, so this is one of my tours, if you stand and look over the side of the bridge, you're standing overlooking the river Guadiana, which flows eventually into Portugal and into the Atlantic. And Portugal, by the way, is only 45 minutes away, so it's really close. But if you stand over there, you can see all sorts of things, ranging from purple gallinules, or purple swamp hens as they're called now, to little bitterns and golden orioles. I mean, it's just an incredible place to be. And I've got a patch that actually starts from that bridge, and if you walk you see the direction we're all kind of standing facing. If you walk off the bridge along the edge of the river, you eventually come to another bridge, which is called the Lusitania Bridge. And in between that, there's a park, an urban park, which I go to a lot. And I remember when I first started going to that park 5 years ago, I must have went during the course of the year maybe 12 times because I was always away. And in those 12 times, I still managed to see 150 different species of bird, 120 different species of bird, which is incredible considering it's an urban park. But, it just shows you how rich the area is. I mean, you walk around here, you're seeing spotless starlings, you're seeing crested larks, more herons. On the river, there are several pairs of kingfisher. You'll see kingfisher quite easily. Spoonbill, glossy ibis, cattle egrets, little egret, purple heron during the summer, nightingales, woodchat shrike, Iberian grey shrike. They're just the staples. And look up in the sky, you'll see booted eagles, you see griffin vultures, you see all sorts. And this is looking further along the river, along my patch. Again, you see, a few on the river itself. I've not seen an amazing amount of water birds on the river, apart from mallards, of course, and great crested grebe and a ton of cormorants. But there's often gulls, especially in the winter, and the usual gulls are lesser blackback and black-headed, but sometimes the odd rarity shows up. I mean, I missed a herring gull last year, but Mediterranean gulls occasionally show up. And in terms of terns, little tern, which I was always surprised by, breeding in the middle of Extremadura, because I always imagined them as being coastal birds. And gull-bill tern is another common bird that nests in some of the reservoirs and actually comes down the river to fish. And there's an example of some of the gulls that gather. It's always exciting getting the scope out and just sifting through to see if you can find anything of interest. I mean, they're all interesting. We all love birds. Every bird is interesting, but sometimes to find something a bit more unusual. I'm doing a year list in Extremadura, and incredibly, I'm sixth, which I can't believe. But now I've got the bug, and I really have to try and see if I can see more. The situation in Spain, though, weather-wise, is that, as I said, it's 36 degrees now. It gets the hottest part of the day is actually 7 o'clock in the evening. So you have to choose your birding times wisely during the summer, because it does get particularly hot around the time where you fancy going out. So you have to go out at first thing in the morning or last thing before sunset. There's plenty of house martins in the city as well. I remember counting just the number of nests on two sides of a building, just one building, and I counted 400 nests on two sides of a building, and I'm sure there were more on the other two sides. But it's incredible to think that those two sides equated to double the population of house martins in the Greater London area, as discovered by the London Wildlife Trust during their survey about 5 or 6 years ago. It shows the serious situation that house martins are facing in London. It's just incredible. But as I say here, they're very common birds to be found. And actually, we can see house martins almost all year round. I mean, during the winter, there's far fewer, but up the road, there's a place called Hornachos, which is a small village, and they were breeding in that village on their church a couple of years ago on December the 18th. Incredible. Some go away completely, but there was always one or two around, and there's plenty of swallows as well, barn swallows, but also during the summer we have red rump swallows, and we also have pallid swift, which turn up in February, and they don't leave till about October, November. Common swift as well, and alpine swift. In fact, alpine swift and pallid swifts nest on that bridge. So you can stand on that bridge and have really stonking close-up views of those swifts flying around, as well as this guy. This is a purple swamp hen, and they are like moorhens on steroids. They are big birds, big beaks, big long toes, make a big noise as well when they do call. And they seem to wander through the smallest bit of cover into the open with equal ease. They're not particularly shy, but they just tend to kind of keep themselves. So sometimes I'm standing on a bridge and I have to spend a few minutes before you actually see one. And then the other birds that you see are waders, and there's plenty of things like black-winged stilts. I mean, Extremadura and even birding around here is incredible. It's just, I've got breeding bee-eaters around the corner. I see them every day flying around during the summer. And another bird that I see quite a lot, and I mentioned earlier, is the Zitting cisticula. It's a warbler, and they make a call. They've got this little display fight when they bounce up and down, going zit, 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 and they're quite tiny as well. I think they're probably the smallest warbler in Europe, I'd imagine. They're even smaller than a chiffchaff. They're really quite small. So that is, in a very quick nutshell, where I'm living at the moment in Extremadura. I'm back in England, I think, in August, but I'm enjoying every second of being here because the birding is phenomenal. Extremadura, by the way, has the biggest number of individual wintering birds of anywhere in the whole of Europe. And it is probably, alongside Andalusia and in Portugal, the Alentejo region, the best places to go birding in the whole of Western Europe. And that's without a doubt. Okay, so that's Spain. I'm going to take you somewhere else now. I'm going to whiz you over across the world to Sri Lanka. I was there a couple of years ago leading a tour, and I want to talk about Colombo, the capital. Sri Lanka I've never been to before, so when I went there I was quite surprised. It was like India but slowed down, and you didn't see quite so much of the poverty that you would see in India. And I enjoyed being in Colombo as well. The first thing I did as an urban birder was to nip down to the local park. The local park's called Victoria Park, and it was quite funny because the park's filled with these old trees, and under each and every tree was a couple a young couple, by the way, in various states or stages, should I say, of their relationship. So some couples under the trees were all lovey-dovey, looking at each other in the eye. Others were looking in opposite directions, and others, either the boy or even the girl, was crying. So it was interesting to see all stages of relationship going on there as well. But once you kind of got over that and you looked up into the trees, a lot of the trees had fruit bats hanging from them, which was really, you could smell them before you saw them anyway. And several of the species were available to see as well. This is an Indian pond heron, which looks very similar to a squacco heron from Europe, but slightly sort of brown as opposed to the russety of the squacco heron that we have. And they were all over the place. And they were inside this pond, which basically had pedlos. If I could expand that picture out, you'll see a pedlo literally about 5 feet away from that bird. And the pond was tiny, but there was still some really interesting birds walking around. And looking up, I didn't see gulls. Instead, I was looking at pelicans. There were tons of pelicans flying around, and I was like shocked. These pelicans actually are spot-billed pelicans, and in fact, it was a new bird for me. I'd never seen them before, and they were quite impressive to watch. Actually, they're big birds, but not as big as the European white pelican, but still pretty big birds. And again, in that pond with people in their pedlos, literally a couple of feet away. But I also went to a couple of areas in and around the outskirts of Colombo, and there was lots of other birds to be noted. Water birds. I saw lots of gull-billed terns like this one. I saw lots of waders like Pacific golden plovers and the thickney. I can't remember what it's called now. Which is a bit like a stone curlew, but again on steroids. And lots of bee-eaters, different types of bee-eaters. And this bird is a pheasant-tailed jacana, which is absolutely stunning. It's a wader, believe it or not, but it looks like a bit of a hybrid between a wader and a moorhen because they've got these long toes and they walk over lily pads. But they are absolutely stunning. and there were a few birds of prey to note, one of which was the shikra. And the shikra is very much like a sparrowhawk. In fact, it is a sparrowhawk, member of the sparrowhawk family, so it's a accipiter, as they call them in the trade, but it's smaller. And interestingly, they've got kind of beady, kind of big eyes, actually, even though it looks beady. Their eyes are quite big, which kind of implies that maybe they're crepuscular. But it's smaller than a sparrowhawk. That's the male, and we saw quite a few of them, and behaving just like you would expect a sparrowhawk to behave. In the sort of jungly bits on the outskirts of Colombo, there were loads of things to see, and I was really happy to see this guy. It looks like a chicken, and it kind of is. It's a Sri Lanka jungle fowl, and it was beautiful. Look at the colours on it; it's just stunning, and it's amazing to think that. Well, I think it's the jungle fowl in India that was actually the ancestor of our chickens. But to think that led to what we have now on our plates, and it's basically the bird longest domesticated by man. Incredible. And there's lots of little birds flying around. Some of them were difficult to identify. I mean, this is a yellow-browed bulbul, but I always forget what it's called. I have to write it down. But it was lovely to watch these birds because they were nesting quite near to where I was standing, and I was watching them all day. Well, not all day, but all the time I was there. I had a little story as well. We went into an area of woodland, and we had to wear our breeches because there were leeches all over the place. And we went in to see this bird, which is a spot-winged thrush, which I'd never seen before. But when I came out, all of us were covered in leeches, and I was taking off leeches, and everyone was taking off their leeches. And one of my group, who was from East London, so he's a bit of a cheeky chappy, he was about to flick his leech at me, and I suddenly got back into my street mode. I wasn't actually a guide, I became a street person, suddenly swore at him and said, "Don't you think about flicking that thing near me." And then I realised that he was joking, and also I realised that I would be the hub of everyone's joke for the rest of the tour. But you know, you can't take the London out of the band, can you? You can't take the London out of the boy. So yeah, that was interesting to see. There's other birds such as the Sri Lanka grey hornbill, which is a really nice and common bird to see around the edges of town, and also even in the large parks. I saw plenty of brown jobs, little brown jobs. This is a Richard's pipit, which of course occasionally turns up in the UK. I don't know how many of you have seen a Richard's pipit, but here they're pretty common. And I've even found, I think that in 10 years, there's been 3 records of Richard's pipit at Wormwood Scrubs, of which I've seen 2 of them. So it's incredible. But you know, if you look out for them, you see them. They're actually quite large, about the size of a skylark. And if you think how small meadow pipits are, they are pretty big. So you should be able to at least know if you wanted something different if you saw one of those in the cemetery or elsewhere for that matter. One of my favourite moments in Sri Lanka, of course, though, was spying this creature, a leopard. I'd never seen a leopard before, so to have seen, I think we saw about 7 in the end in Yala National Park was a real treat. Very happy to see them. And one of the most exciting birds we saw is a very rare one, which has only been discovered in the last 15 years, and that's the Serendib scops owl, and it looks amazing. Tiny little bird, only discovered recently. Serendib actually used to be the name of Sri Lanka before it was Ceylon. And this bird was found by our local guide, who basically the day before got into the woodland and spent the day sitting there and waited until nightfall so he wouldn't disturb it if it come at nightfall, to then hear it was calling, and then he tracked it down and sat with it till the morning. I mean, that's dedication, isn't it? So, Sri Lanka, interesting place, well worth a visit, and the urban birding's pretty good. We're going to move further east and a little bit north to Taiwan. Taiwan is a place I've been to now twice, and it is a place that I thought to myself when I've been there, when I first went there, that I would love to retire there. I don't like the food much, so I wouldn't get fat, but I'd love the birding, and that's the main thing, I think. Around Taipei, the capital, there's plenty of options for birding. This is a maroon oriole, which is related to the golden oriole. Similar kind of song and just as gorgeous, but obviously maroon. They've also got crested tits, or not even crested. Well, they got crested tits, but they're not crested tits. This is actually a coal tit. Coal tits have massive crests in Taiwan. But did you know that the coal tits in the UK also have a crest? They have a tiny, tiny crest. So next time you look at one close up, check it out. It's got a really tiny, wispy crest. But it seems the further east you go, the bigger the crest gets. But it's still the same species. It was great being in a nature reserve near the city, and I love watching people's reaction to nature. I remember turning around and I saw this woman taking pictures of the scenery, and then she turned around and she had a fright because a nutcracker suddenly appeared on the sign. And she jumped, and then she got a phone and took a picture of it, which was great. I loved that interaction. She probably didn't know what it was. She probably thought it was a crow or something. Well, she's right, it is a type of crow, but it was lovely and unexpected for us as well, because I didn't expect to see a nutcracker and just suddenly pop out of nowhere. One of the key birds in Taiwan is this bird. This bird, which is locally known as the iPhone bird, and it's called the iPhone bird because you can actually take a picture of it with your iPhone. It doesn't really go away. It's quite confiding. It's a white-whiskered laughing thrush, and they really do not care about people. They just hop around, going about their business, and they're gorgeous. And, you can't fail to take a picture of them. You can't fail to take a good picture even. Taiwan is filled with people with cameras, not so much birders, but people with cameras. So they're all out with their cameras, and it is a bit of a macho thing I've noticed, big lenses, and sometimes people don't know what they're taking pictures of. It's all about, I've got a better picture than yours. And I'd much prefer that attitude than them turning around with guns. So one of the key quarries is this absolutely stunning, gorgeous beauty. This is a swin-hose pheasant, which is only found on Taiwan. It's actually an endemic, beautiful bird. When you see it, the iridescence of its plumage and also the white on its tail and its back, sometimes when you see it on a forest trail, it looks like a badger. It just kicks out. But there's certain spots along a particular road where, for some reason, they come out to feed on the grit. So people just wait and twitch them. And if they're lucky, if they're super lucky, they might get this one. This is a Mikado pheasant. And I tell you what, its plumage, the male, looks like crushed velvet. It's just incredible. Such a stunning bird to see. Stunning. I mean, well worth going to Taiwan just to see those two species. I was lucky also to, whilst waiting for the pheasants to arrive, to see Taiwan Partridge. I saw a covey of them. I saw about 6 or 7. They're particularly hard to find, and it was nice that they popped up in the undergrowth. So when you're looking around, I always say look up, but sometimes you do need to look down, because sometimes you see evidence of things that you may not have noticed before. And I looked up when I saw that stuff on the floor to see this fella. And this is a Malayan night heron, and they are found in the middle of Taipei in small parks as well. They have a Southeastern Asian distribution, but you can't see them better than anywhere else in the world than Taiwan, and in particular Taipei. And sometimes you see them in parks where there's no undergrowth, and they stand there. And when you get close to them, they stand erect like a bittern would, thinking that they're in reeds, but they're out in the open. It's quite mad. So yeah, Taiwan, well worth a visit. The urban birding is spectacular. So I think what I'm going to do now, because we've got about 5 minutes left, I'm going to end on a story which some of you may already know because I talk about it all the time, and that's Serbia, and in particular, and I can't even see my cursor, but in particular, north of Novi Sad. I originally went to Serbia about 10, 11 years ago. I was invited to Belgrade to open a urban birding watch point on top of a tall building, and that went well. But then the tourist board said, come back in the spring, you're going to love it, come back. So I came back in the spring, and I was led by my now Serbian brother. His name is Milan, and basically we went to the northern part of Serbia, and at first we were looking at all sorts of birds that we could see in neighbouring Hungary and Romania. We're looking at bee-eaters and rollers and black-headed buntings and all sorts of really interesting things, redback shrikes everywhere. He took me to a park because he saw me hankering for a bit of urban birding. And when I walked into that park, he then pointed up, because this park was wooded and there were people walking their dogs and holding hands and all that sort of stuff, usual stuff you do in the park. I looked up and there was a long-eared owl, and I was shocked. And then my colleague Malayan made a call and he looked down at us. And then I looked around and I suddenly realized that there were 22 nesting pairs, semi-colonially nesting in this small wood. I couldn't believe it. They were nesting in a rookery with rooks, alongside about 35 pairs of kestrel and about 12 pairs of red-footed falcon. I was bowled over. I practically collapsed. I couldn't believe it, because in my life, I've only ever seen a few long-eared owls ever, in England. Never have I been to see anywhere where it's nested. So, Milan showed me where some of them were nesting in nest boxes like that, but also in wicker baskets out in the open. It's just incredible. So I asked him, I said, why are there so many around? And he said, well, basically the farming methods in Serbia are like, or were like, what Britain was maybe 200 years ago. So they don't harvest everything. The grain is not all collected, so there's grain on the ground. And also their barns have no roofs, or not roofs, walls even. So therefore, there's rodents all over the place. So basically, during the day, kestrels hunt them, and at night, the owls come out to play. So that winter, I came back with a group of people, most of whom have never seen any kind of owl before, and we had a little surprise for them. We took them to this place called Kikinda. On the way to Kikinda, actually, we stopped off at a few places, and we saw, an owl here and an owl there. We saw quite a few of these owls, long-eared owls, roosting in the trees, basically in urban areas, or in cemeteries or parks. And sometimes you'd even see them in the most unusual of places, just coming out, they might have been flushed by someone walking into their garden or something. And the numbers were quite incredible, actually, because for every one you see, or two you see, you've got to multiply it by about 2 or maybe 3, because there's so many more that power out of the trees when you actually, if anyone gets too close to the trees. We got to Kikinda. Now, Kikinda is in northern Serbia. It's a standard town by Serbian, standards. They've got a town square, and you walk into the town square in the winter between, say, December and early March. And it's like walking into a Harry Potter set, because basically you're talking about upwards of 800 long-eared owls that roost there every winter. It's just incredible. I mean, I've been leading tours to Serbia for the last 10 years now just to see this spectacle, and I still can't get over it. I could talk at length about why they're there and how they behave and stuff. Maybe I can answer that in the questions, because I'm aware of the time restraints we've got. But it is incredible to see all these owls. I'm speechless half the time. So Serbia is a place you need to put on your list once we get back to some kind of normality, and you need to come and check these things out. But anyway, all I want to say is that, I spend my entire life basically going around trying to talk to people in urban areas to get them engaged with nature. And it's interesting in the case of Kikinda, because 10 years ago when I first arrived, they were looking at me saying, what are you looking at? And now when I'm bringing tourists, the whole nature of the place has changed now, because they now have stores selling paraphernalia, owl paraphernalia. In Serbia, owls are called sova, so they've renamed November Savember, and they get kids to dress up as owls during the whole of that month. So there's now an education process going where kids are learning about owls, whereas previously they used to kill them because they thought they were birds of doom. But now they understand that these are great for ecotourism. So that's really good. I've now been named as a son of Kikinda. They now call me David Lindovich when I turn up. But it's just really great. And the best thing of all is that the government has made this town square, which is effectively concrete with a few trees and a couple of churches and stuff. They've made it into a nature reserve. So it's the first of its kind in the world. And also, if you're caught disturbing the owls, particularly around Christmas when, people are tempted to put lights in the trees and set off firecrackers and stuff, you could be fined up to 10,000 euros. That is incredible. And that just shows you that you don't have to go to the middle of nowhere to see interesting things. You can actually go to the middle of somewhere. And sometimes things are right under your nose or above your head. Thank you very much, guys, for allowing me to talk to you tonight about some of my travels. I can speak all day and all night about some of the urban birding adventures I've had, and also about London as well. I thought I'd be talking about worm and scrubs, but I haven't got the time. But if you've got questions, please feel free to ask, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much. Let me see if I can try and...
That's absolutely
great.
brilliant.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. That's great.
Take the thing up, actually. Can't see my cursor.
Mute.
You can't cut me off, can you?
No?
Sure.
Can you stop my share? Because I can't see my cursor.
Yeah, Ken should be able to do that.
I might be able to stop your share. I think it might be something you'll have to do, David. Yeah, I don't have... well, I can tell you what I can do is I can just turn it off like that. There we go. There we go. See, back in the room. Good. Well, thank you very much, David. That was absolutely fantastic. Loved all your enthusiasm and hearing all about your journeys and all those fantastic birds. I especially loved that owl picture. That was brilliant.
Amazing.
That was amazing.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, but also
I did
if
have a
anyone
question,
would
I
like the
forgot.
opportunity to turn their mic on, you're very welcome to ask a question.
Sneaky question from the staff here. What is your favourite bird in London?
Okay, what was my what?
What's your favourite bird in London?
In London?
Yeah.
Well, my favourite bird in London is my favourite bird in the world, so it makes no difference where I am. You can ask me that question if I was in Peru, I'll still answer the same question, the same answer. My favourite bird in the whole world, which I fell in love with in London, and that comes to visit me every year when I'm in London, is the ring ouzel. I don't know if you can see it, a stupid background on, but the ring ouzel looks like a blackbird, but it's got a white crescent on its chest. So it's where my finger is there. And it's my...
I know what I was going to say. Why is it so hot at 7 o'clock at night? Oh, I've missed him.
Sorry, is that someone else with their mic on?
Yeah.
Yeah, Avril, I think that's you, Avril. We can hear you. Did you want to ask David a question?
Is that me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, I was going to ask, why is it so hot at 7 o'clock at night? Why is that why it's so warm that time of day?
Well, it's all about the land heating up. During the course of the day, it just heats up. And around
okay.
is the ultimate time. I mean,
Right.
in August, I was here a few years ago, and it was at 11 o'clock, still 33 degrees.
Gosh.
But, I mean, yeah, 7 o'clock, I mean, it's actually quite hot. And I'm actually feeling the heat now, to be honest. It gets quite hot. In the winter, you're lucky if it gets to about, well, I say lucky, it's still great, but it's about 20, 21. It's getting the highest temperature. But even then, in the first part of the morning before dawn, it could be 0 or even -2 or 3. But then it builds up fairly quickly to that heat. Land just heats up really quick. And because it's an expansive land, that's how it kind of behaves, really.
Right.
It's
Oh,
Mediterranean.
excellent. Thanks.
Can I ask something? Can I ask? Are birds? Do you find there's a problem with trapping birds? And generally, Taiwan or Sri Lanka, are they respected or what? I've got this idea that I know in Spain. I thought in Spain they trap small birds, or
Well,
perhaps I've got a prejudiced idea of what.
the trapping of small birds is illegal, apparently. Even though I'm sure it may still go on a little bit. Even in England, I mean, I've heard that people are trapping birds in East London. a couple of years ago, and probably maybe still doing that. I think the biggest problem, certainly in the Mediterranean, is shooting, is hunting. Now, it's saying that they're only supposed to be hunting partridge and rabbits, but I know that in the winter they shoot song thrushes en masse, and because song thrushes come down to winter. And on top of that, I work with, there's only 2 animal hospitals in the whole of the region. So we're talking about somewhere twice the size of Wales of just 2 animal hospitals. One of them I work with, and they receive, fairly regularly birds of prey that have been shot. And often the reason given is, oh, I thought it was a partridge. So, I mean, how can you shoot an eagle owl and mistake it for a partridge? I don't know. Hunting, and they shoot turtle doves as well, unfortunately, too. I found the dead one being shot for southern Spain. So that kind of stuff still goes on, unfortunately. In the rest of the world, I mean, especially in places like, well, Sri Lanka, I think, they've got a lot of respect as far as I can see, as in Taiwan as well. There seems to be a lot of respect for the wildlife, but in other areas, it's just tough. That's why it's so important. I think ecotourism is such an important thing, because once people realize, like in Serbia, that people want to come and see these animals, then they'll do their best to protect them so that people will come and spend money. So that's my counter argument sometimes when people point the finger at me saying, what about your carbon footprint? I mean, my argument is, I'm also a writer, so I write about these areas, which obviously helps promote the wildlife and the countries. But I think when you do responsible ecotourism and you're looking at species that are needing of help, then I think it's better than not doing anything at all. That's why I'm worried about this pandemic, because some of these places have not had visitors, and I'm just worrying whether people will forget what they had before.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yes. So I was going to say your question, Susie, so please feel free to do it.
Well, I have a different question to that one now, because someone gave me a good answer to that one. So, hi, David. Thanks for a great talk. What would be your top tips for spotting birds in urban areas?
I think one of the things to do is to empty your mind of preconceptions, because, when I speak to people who are new to birding, or, just talk to people about birding, they think, London, it's just pigeons and sparrows, that's it. Not that there's many sparrows anymore. But it's more than that, because when you think about the whole of the UK, for example, since records began, there's been about 620 species recorded, whether once or common breeders or winter visitors or whatever. And of that number, at least 95% have been found in urban areas. And London's total is about nearly 360 species. So, I mean, I've watched puffing from Hamlets Bridge one year, so anything can turn up. So to have an open mind is the first thing. Secondly, I think, is to, when you start watching birds, not to worry too much about identifying them, just enjoy them for the time being, and then by osmosis start trying to learn that way, as opposed to really forcing yourself to look through the book and I've got to know what that is. I think it's more about just doing it at your own pace. Joining a group is a great thing to do as well, because then you can speed track you're learning a lot more. But I think it's good to just have an open mind. I mean, I didn't know anything. I taught myself. My apprenticeship lasted 15 years, and I actually really got to know my blackbirds and robins intimately. And then once you learn those birds, anything else you see, it's different immediately, because it's not like the birds you know well. And you have a really good foundation of knowledge. But it's about just taking your time. I think, trying to go out as much as you can, trying to find yourself a local patch, walk around your patch, get to know the local birds, get to know what kind of birds show up during, spring and autumn and winter. And then you build up this knowledge unconsciously. And then you also unconsciously begin to recognize things. Like you might see a starling for a split second and you think, oh, starling. And then you suddenly think, hang on, I just recognized that without even thinking about it. And you get to that point, and that's a beautiful point to get to, because then you just, you can just expand from there. So don't feel pressure. Don't feel as if you need to see X amount of species by 2 months' time. Forget all that crap. It's not about competition. It's about you enjoying your environment the way you want to enjoy it.
Great, thanks.
People seem very interested about where the ringed ouzel is in London.
The ringed ouzel in the UK is a very scarce species. It has a lot of similarities to the blackbird. It looks like a blackbird apart from the white crescent. It's a little bit slimmer, longer winged. It's a summer visitor as well, and it's normally found in the wilder areas of Britain, so in the west and in the north, in the mountainous areas and really kind of, well, I suppose desolate areas. But they also arrive anywhere on migration. And the ones that, for example, come through London are the ones that normally then head on to Scandinavia, because they're also found in parts of Europe. The birds that we have in the UK tend to fly direct to their breeding sites. So any area where, there's a bit of hedgerow going on, a bit of, like at Wormer Scrubs, I've got some grassland areas with hawthorns and stuff, and they just turn up. It was really strange because the first time I saw them there, which was about now, 14, 15 years ago, I actually had a dream the night before that I'd see one. And I woke up in the morning thinking, what the hell's that about? I've never seen one in London. I've never seen one on the Scrubs before. What's that about? And I went to the Scrubs. It was April. I went to the Scrubs and I walked around. I didn't see much. And I remember walking back to the car. And as I turned to the car, I decided for some reason to look over my shoulder. And as I did, I saw something dark fly across my head and land about 50 feet away. Got my bins on it. And there, filling the whole screen, was a male ringed ouzel. I couldn't believe it. My favourite bird had come to see me. So every year from that point on, I saw them. You had to be in it to win it. You can't just show up. You had to be in it to win it. And I kind of worked out that it was the penultimate week of April was the best time. And I saw them every year, apart from 1 year when I went in the penultimate week of April. I went every day. I didn't see one at all. The whole of the spring went. I didn't see one at all. The whole summer went. I was depressed. Autumn came. I went out almost every day in September in the morning to look for a ring ouzel. Didn't see any. The whole of October, didn't see any. October 31st comes, I'm beside myself. I can't even explain how depressed I was. I went to sleep that night, as most of us did, and I had a dream, and I dreamt that I saw ring ouzel on my patch. And I woke up on November the 1st thinking, all of them now are down in, Southern Europe and Northern Africa. There's not going to be any ring ouzels on my patch. I went to my patch anyway, walked around, turned the corner. On the bare tree, I saw not one, but 3 ring ouzels, 2 of which stayed for a week, and they were the latest ring ouzels in the whole of the UK, on my patch in West London. So it shows that anything can turn up anywhere at any time, and you just have to believe, open your mind to anything turning up, and you'll see it. The other thing to say about ring ouzels is that there's about 7,000 pairs, and they're decreasing compared to 8 to 9 million pairs of blackbird.
Yeah, I can say that we did once have a male ring ouzel come down in the cemetery park for a day.
Brilliant.
Yeah, no, that was why, and that was just like you said, just absolute chance, right place, right time, and there it was. So yeah, that was a really good spot for us. Yeah, that distinctive bib, it really is. It really does stand out.
Fantastic.
Right. Does anybody else have any more questions? I've got one. At the weekend, I saw a behaviour with coots that I'd never seen before. They possibly do this all the time. I don't, I've always, they're quite a common bird you'd see. As I was a child, I used to go to the lake every single day to watch the birds. So I was just shocked that I hadn't seen it before. But they were kind of facing opposite each other and like almost on their backs.
Yeah,
and, like, using their legs like to kick each other, and it was really intense, and they were like pushing each other down, and I wondered whether that was males or was that a male and a female, and somehow their cloacas kind of meet each other to reproduce, or do you know?
If that was the case, that's what you call rough sex. No,
okay, it is.
But it's not. It's 2 males fighting. There's 2 males. I'm saying a joke, but maybe it's a bad joke. 2 males fighting you know, you don't get males and females fighting like that normally. There'll be some sort of territorial dispute. No, it'll be two males.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. It's interesting because I was talking to someone who does research on warblers. He's a real guru in warblers. And he said that most birds, when they copulate, it normally lasts seconds, yeah? But there's a bird called the Aquatic Warbler, and the male spends, I think, at least 20 minutes copulating, which by bird standards is absolutely like, you know, all night long. So that was quite interesting. Anyway, moving on.
Okay.
Great,
I've got a question, if I'm allowed to ask one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, given that in Siberia you have all those owls and you've got lots of them in that urban park, how do they survive? What do they eat?
Okay, the owls in Serbia, they are predominantly eating rodents, of which there are millions of them there. It's absolutely packed with rodents. And my colleague Milan, who happens to be the chair of or president of the Serbia BirdLife Partner, he's been doing a lot of work over the years to work out what they were feeding on. He realised that they are important in keeping down the numbers of rodents. And in fact, they've worked out that it's actually beneficial to have long-eared owls on your farm, for example, because they actually earn you money. The family of long-eared owls earn more money sometimes than the family living in the farm in terms of the number of rodents they can kill. So they are now actively encouraged to nest on farms. But yeah, they actually eat rodents during bad years, because obviously with rodents they have up and down years. In bad years, the long-eared owls may turn on the collared doves that share their roosts. And Milan told me once that he was ringing a bunch of blue tits one winter, and then I think a couple of days later he found that most of them had been eaten by the long-eared owls. So quite interesting. But long-eared owls themselves get preyed upon by other birds. In the summer, if they nest in woodlands, then the king of the woodland is the goshawk, who eats anything that moves. And long-eared owls are often their prey. And tawny owls and long-eared owls don't get on either. Tawny owls will kill long-eared owls and eat them as well. So long-eared owls, in the kind of pecking order of owls, are kind of low down.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
Sorry, I just want to check with David. Are you okay for time? Because I know that we've run over. There's just a few more questions.
Yes, I like answering questions. It's great.
Great. Jerry, did you have a question?
Yes, so hi David. So Terry Lyle and myself were walking through Victoria Park, coming back from a pond dipping seminar, event with children, and there were some coots up on the grass with some geese, and the coots were cropping the grass, and I hadn't seen that before, and we stopped and watched it, and I wondered whether it was, you know, the coots mimicking the geese. Do coots crop grass like that? You know, like basically like a miniature goose.
Yeah, they do eat vegetable matter, coots. So I've seen them do that too, actually, sometimes. They do eat vegetable matter. They're omnivores. So they eat all manner of things from, you know, fish, invertebrates. They also eat vegetable. I mean, I don't know why they'd be eating the grass, to be honest, but there must be something of interest for them to be eating it. But yeah, that's not unusual.
So it wasn't just mimicking behaviour, or perhaps it was a bit of both.
Well, I don't see why it would be mimicking. It doesn't really kind of... Mimicking is normally to have some kind of benefit. So mimicking normally is either some kind of plumage situation or mimicking behaviour to avoid being hunted.
Okay.
So some species may appear to look like a bird of prey purely to avoid, you know, being hunted. So the coot doing what he was doing, maybe just because he's actually genuinely feeding.
The most weird bird I've seen in London, I've heard an eagle owl in Clapton and was speaking to somebody a couple of weeks later who knew their big birds and had actually seen it on rooftops to the west of London Fields. But I'm involved with a garden in Haggerston, quite a large garden, a horticultural therapeutic project. And I was working in the greenhouse and I suddenly heard a pheasant. And I used to spend a lot of time in Suffolk, so I just thought, okay, there's a pheasant. And then I thought, hang on a minute, this is Haggerston, a pheasant. And I sort of ran out, and there walking amongst the raised vegetable beds was a cock pheasant. And it flew into the adventure playground next door and went up into the trees, and then we didn't see it again. It just flown in over the fence. And when, you know, we hastily looked up pheasants in the urban area and discovered that they are seen on Walthamstow, Hackney Marsh. I've never seen one there. I mean, how on earth, you know, have you ever heard? We saw that a pheasant had been seen in Peckham, Rye. Have you ever heard of a pheasant being seen in inner London?
Yeah, I've seen pheasant in London. I saw pheasant in Hyde Park once, walking around in the flower beds. And I've also seen pheasant in Wormwood Scrubs. And I've seen red-legged partridge whilst playing football in Paddington, surrounded by concrete. What they tend to do is walk along railway lines to get to various spots. But what you must remember about pheasants is that there's masses of them introduced every year for hunting. About 20 million are released. So obviously, without that kind of huge number, they do get about. But yeah, it's really unusual when you do see them. I remember one record of someone seeing a pheasant on the second or first floor ledge of a block of buildings in Holland Park. You know, so what it was doing up there, God knows. But they do get about.
Do they survive though? Because I just presume that they will be quite soon hit by a car or something like that.
Well, that's a possibility, but they tend, you know, when I see them, they tend to be in parks or, you know, in areas where they can actually feed. I think the main problem is that there may not be enough sort of habitat for them to hide in, so they may eventually succumb to, you know, even the dog, but certainly fox.
Yeah.
Fox. So, but yeah, I mean, they tend to sort of follow railway lines and other sort of lines that we sort of put in from the countryside in, so they can come in that way. But yeah, it is always a surprise when you see them, but they have been known to wander around in central London, yeah.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jerry. We've got 4 questions left in the chat, and I think we'll have to stick to just those ones, but say, David, if you have to go any earlier. But Wild Bee asks, what was the puffin doing in London? Like, why would they be here?
Well, every now and again there's storms out to sea, and these birds were blown in. They're part of a raft of stuff that was blown in. I remember there were guillemots, and I think a couple of guillemots and a puffin on the Thames. And this kind of happens, you know, sometimes every year at some point you get a record of a gannet being seen, or, you know, I've seen kittiwakes. I've seen a kittiwake on my patch in West London, you know, flying over. So sometimes these seafaring birds end up blown inland. I mean, there's that famous case maybe about 5 years ago where a Corey's shearwater, which is it's an oceanic bird basically, but that was found flying over Richmond Park. So, you know, it all goes to show that anything can turn up anywhere at any time and never be sort of shocked, you know, because weird things show up. So when there's adverse weather out to sea, it can blow a lot of these birds in.
Great. And Judy and Terry asked, do you know anything about the Egyptian geese in Shadwell Basin? But I think there's Egyptian geese over quite a lot of London, but I don't know if there's something specific about them in Shadwell Basin.
Well, I don't know about the ones there, but they're introduced species. They've been, I think they were originally introduced in East Anglia, probably in Norfolk, in the 1800s, mid-1800s, and they've kind of proliferated from there. In fact, they are found in other cities around Europe, like Brussels, or even in Spain, I've seen them. So they're feral that have now become sort of naturalized. And they're interesting because they're named after the marking on their eye, which apparently looks a bit like Cleopatra's makeup. So that's why they're called Egyptian geese. Their natural range is practically the whole of Africa. I've seen them in southern Africa, and they are kind of in between geese and duck in terms of their taxonomy. So they're interesting species that, you know, you go to Hyde Park and there's tons of them. So that's another reason why they could be spreading in London, because they're breeding quite well and they're moving on to other areas to breed.
Great, thank you. Okay, just 2 more questions. Blossom asks, are you encouraged by some of the reports about wildlife thriving during COVID? Your description about Serbia offers important ways for nature to be rebuilt in, possible to extend in cities.
I'm heartened by that in terms of, you know, nature doing well during lockdown. I just hope that, my worry was that obviously no one knew how long lockdown would be, because some of the birds were breeding. I was hoping that lockdown would last long enough at least for them to get their first brood away. I was worried, for example, more internationally, when you heard about lockdown in America and beaches being closed, and I was thinking, great, because a lot of shorebirds will be nesting on these beaches thinking, oh, we found some new territory. But then all of a sudden, lockdown ends and a whole ton of people descend on the beach, and then that's them done. So that was my worry globally, I suppose. I just hope that people have learnt from this and will sort of consider nature more. I also had a couple of worries, because even though we were in lockdown and birds were singing, I was alarmed at the number of people on Twitter who were sticking their phones in nests to show people what was in a nest, which is a complete no-no, because doing that, you know, the adults can desert the nest, and that's that. And the other thing was, it was great that people were gardening, but a lot of people were actually doing things they normally did in the autumn, like pruning. Again, some of the birds were nesting in bushes like that, and, you know, I knew someone who actually uprooted a hedge, thinking, I'm going to take the hedge out now because I was going to do it anyway. And I said, oh, don't do that, she'd already did it, you know, because you're taking away valuable areas for nesting. So I think if it happens again, and hopefully it doesn't happen again, I think, you know, what a lot of the NGOs and people like myself need to do is speak up more about what people can be doing to help nature during these periods, you know, like not sticking your phone in their nests, and try not to clip hedges until later on in the year.
Great, thank you. And last question, Stan asks, short of berries, what sort of plants are good to grow as wild bird feed? For example, do birds eat grass seeds if you don't mow?
This is a big question, and I'm not the world's expert on gardening at all. However, you know, I subscribe to the idea that leaving an area of your garden wild, in inverted commas, and letting the weeds, in inverted commas, grow is a really good thing, because a lot of those plants attract invertebrates, insects, and other animals, which in turn attract birds. I think in most instances, the best thing to do is to plant native plants. There's a few exceptions. Obviously, Buddleia is a good exception, because that's fantastic for butterflies, and at night, because it's scented, it also attracts moths, and it's a good, you know, it's a very good thing for those creatures. And if you've got space, then it's always nice to plant a shrub. The Taniesta is good, you know, rowan, all that sort of stuff. But there's lots of information you can get elsewhere regarding the types of stuff to plant. I mean, my book, How to Be an Urban Birder, there's a whole section on gardening and all sorts of suggestions in terms of what you can plant. And then there's other people you can talk to on Twitter. The Butterfly Brothers, Joel Ashton is one. He's a really great guy. He always answers you, and he has a lot of information. And my good mate Kate Bradbury in Brighton, she also has a lot of good suggestions in terms of what to plant and how to attract not only birds but insects to your garden as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. That was so interesting and really amazing questions from everyone. So thank you so much for contributing. Yeah, I think if we all want to switch our microphones back on, or, you know, want to give a round of applause and a cheer for David, that would be great.
Thank you, David.
if you need any more information from me, you can always contact me. My website is theurbanbirderworld.com, the Urban Birder World. And there's lots of information on there about urban birding anyway, if you want to check it out. But yeah, give me a shout if you need any more information.